think part of love is treating people with respect. That doesn't mean you always agree with them, and we'll get into that. But just they're another person that God created as allowed to be on the earth. And I think you start with that person from the perspective of, I need to treat you with care and respect simply because you're another human being. And we start from that foundation. And so that's part of what it means to love your neighbor as well, is how do we interact with people we don't know or even people we don't like very well?
Welcome, everyone, to podcast number 149, Renew Your Mind. With us today, we have Senior Pastor Paul Gruenberg. We have Associate Pastor Jeremy Touroo, who is also our Director of Family and Youth. And we have retired Pastor Barry Sweet, and myself, Dana Hall, as the moderator. And today, we're going to start off, we've been on the topic or the series of the Old Testament, and I have picked a scripture. Well, actually, the question was, does the Old Testament say, love your neighbor? And in Leviticus 19:18, it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So I'm keeping in the series of the Old Testament, but we want to have this conversation about what does it mean to love your neighbor?
So I think a part of the Old Testament understanding of loving your neighbor, especially those who were not a part of the Hebrew nation, was to be able to offer hospitality. It was all about hospitality, welcoming them, providing a place. One of the things that you should be able to go to a town square, and if you were going through the town or on your way through, and find some hospitality for the night or a place to stay, food to eat, and then you could be off in the morning. So hospitality was a form of love that you expressed, that you showed to those who maybe were not your family or were coming through town. But it was also included for those who were foreigners. And this was the part where the ingrafting of people who were not a part of the Israelite nation could be ingrafted and become a part of the tree of the Israelites, or become like an Israelite. And that was permissible. Where other cultures, I don't know if they did or didn't allow for people to come in, but we sometimes see in the Old Testament as the Israelites being the exclusive, and they were chosen by God to reveal God fully to the nations around them.
That's right. Yeah.
And those other nations, people from those other nations, could come into the life of the Israelites and be grafted in to the faith, into a relationship with God through the law.
I think part of love is treating people with respect. That doesn't mean you always agree with them, and we'll get into that. But just they're another person that God created as allowed to be on the earth. And I think you start with that person from the perspective of, I need to treat you with care and respect simply because you're another human being. And we start from that foundation. And so that's part of what it means to love your neighbor as well, is how do we interact with people we don't know or even people we don't like very well? Is one, we don't have to be like them. If they're misbehaving and people that are angry or whatever, we don't have to be that kind of person to them, and maybe model a different way for them.
Yeah, and to look at, so Jesus repeats that command in the New Testament, love your neighbor as yourself. And he uses the Greek word agape for love, which is the special form of godly love that we see throughout the New Testament. It's the love of John 3:16, the love that God would send his son into the world to give his life, that all who believe in them may have everlasting life. So we're supposed to love with agape love. So as Barry's kind of saying, that doesn't mean we have to like someone, that we have to be best friends with them, that we have to be affectionate with them, and we have to love everyone in that way, like they're our best friends. We might not even like some people as a friend.
Are you saying there are some Christians you don't like?
I didn't say Christians.
It might be.
But we have to love them, agape love, which means unconditional, seeking the highest good of another person, and it typically involves a sacrifice on our behalf. So even with the hospitality way of showing love that Pastor Paul mentioned, you're sacrificing your space, your time, your resources.
Like the Good Samaritan story
Yeah.
that Jesus
Yes.
told, is that the Samaritan is the outcast, and he's caring, for, I think it's a Jewish person, and they're supposed to be natural enemies, and then he pays the bill and all of that and goes the
Takes care of the
second, third,
ones, yeah.
10th mile,
Yeah.
beyond. And basically that's a loving neighbor.
That's
kind of
the
approach.
example. That's the example that
Intellectually,
Jesus
I
gives.
understand what you just defined, but emotionally, loving somebody but not liking them, it still feels not quite right to me.
Yeah.
But intellectually, I do understand that.
Yeah, and it's-
You may
Does
not
that
like
make
someone,
sense?
but you treat them with respect.
Right. It's like
I
love
would
your
treat
enemies.
them with respect,
That's agape.
yeah.
Love your
Yeah.
enemies. Do you like your enemy? Is your enemy your friend?
Right.
No,
No.
they're your enemy. But
Right.
yet we still have to love them?
Right.
So
Interesting.
we think about how we
Yeah.
treat them.
Right.
We treat them differently than they treat us.
Yes.
Well, I think it comes back to, and this was my prayer, I don't know, too many years ago to say out loud. But to God, I said, I want to see your people through your rose-colored glasses. How do you see people? And God enabled me to see that he loves everyone he created. And I should love them as well. And that can be difficult at times, especially when there's backbiting or gossiping about yourself. How do you love someone through that? And for me, it's conversations, acknowledging them, listening to understand where they're at, why they did what they did, and letting them know that I still love them. Now, the agape love is not filial love, which is brotherly love. And that's the kind of love that, hey, let's go watch the game together, or, let's sit down and watch a movie, or, stuff like that. The familial kind of love. So unconditional love is not that warm, fuzzy, hey, let's go hang out together kind of love. It's just simply an unconditional love. And for me, it's acknowledging that the person who is in front of me is someone that God created to be in relationship with themselves.
Yes.
And that my job is to help them to find that relationship with God. How can I do that if I'm yelling at them?
That's right.
How can I do that if I'm smiting them or smoting them or whatever biblical Testament word you want to use? You can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we need to really focus in on is in many ways we're talking about people outside of the church, outside of the faith, that are living lives.
Oh, this was in the church, the backbiting.
Okay, well,
the
that
gossiping.
happens in the church, no
Yeah.
question. But I'm thinking it expands, this loving neighbor expands to people outside the faith that we come in contact with every single
absolutely.
day.
Sure.
And how we treat them, how we approach them, are we grace givers to them, whether they deserve it or not?
Yeah.
Opens doors if we're that kind of person, because
Yeah.
they might then ask the question, you're different. What is it about you?
Yeah.
And then begins to develop a relationship so that you earn the right to be heard, and you can walk with them in the midst of their failures as well as their successes, and develop a relationship with them, help them develop a relationship then with God.
Right.
Yeah. Or you think about forgiving another person as a outpouring of that type of love.
How
So
could you forgive me? Yeah.
Yeah. So someone who's being an enemy to you treats you very poorly, and yet you show them forgiveness. There's a form of agape love where that
Right.
person
Right.
says, whoa, what?
Yeah, I
happening
remember,
here?
Yeah.
Remember the shooting down was in North or South Carolina, the little church, and one of the, I think it was the husband of a wife forgave the shooter.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, I think that was at the trial. He asked for permission to speak and,
And I think the
publicly forgave him.
Amish school shooting, the same thing happened.
That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, is that the parents and family and the community prayed for the shooter and
Forgave.
cared for his family and that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
I remember that.
Yeah. And that's, a lot of people were shocked by that.
Yeah.
Now that's an extreme, but
Yeah.
some other things in regard to loving. We were talking beforehand. Jeremy said in terms of tough love. when there is in a marriage adultery, there's a love that a husband and wife have, not the sexual love, but the unconditional love. But trust has been broken. And so trust needs to be earned again from the spouse that committed the adultery. And that can be hard. But with a tough love, these are the guidelines we need to follow. No more, let's say pornography was involved. No more pornography. Or, if it was a male who was talking to female friends all the time, you just can't do that. Well, there are certain things you just don't do because it's going to lead you into brokenness, right? So if you begin drinking and you find that drinking helps soothe your brokenness, well, more drinking will help you soothe more brokenness until finally you're drinking all the time. And tough love would be to say, hey, you need to not do that. Especially if someone's driving and they're drunk, you could be taking somebody else's life. And so there's some accountability. So you take the keys away, right? That's the big thing at a bar, right? You have a jar with everyone's keys and you throw them in there. And if somebody tries to take them out, they get basically looked at by everyone else and, man, they've been drinking way too much. Someone get them a ride or something like that. So there's some accountability to love, to truly love somebody. But there's also the desire to help them to change too.
Sure.
And sometimes that's perceived by people as being judgmental, disrespectful. You're not letting me be who I am. And whenever, is that, well, you're better than I am, or you think you are. And that's not what's going on at all, is that you're trying to help, you're trying to love. And sometimes love, you present truth to someone and they're not ready to hear it. Or they are hearing it and their initial reaction is self-protection. But we need to be prepared sometimes in those situations for a negative reaction when we're trying to be...
Not just one negative reaction.
Yeah, sometimes many.
Time after time after time.
But I think the message is if we hang in there with someone...
Right.
They eventually see the fact that we hang in there with them, even though they come back at us pretty harshly.
Right.
And if we still care about them, but still present the truth to them, I think eventually it gets through.
Well, and then that's just a form of godly love.
Absolutely.
Right?
Or it may get through after your time.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't
maybe
know.
Years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
So,
true.
And you also think of parents raising their children and disciplining out of love for them. And
Right.
if you do not discipline or correct your children and just let them do whatever they want, are you actually loving them? You may paint that with a brush of, well, I love them and I want them to be who they want to be. And
Or I'll let them make their own decision.
decisions,
like
and
a
I want them
2-year-old
to
can
have
make their own
fun
decision.
because I love them and have
Yeah.
everything they want. That's not love, though. I mean,
Sometimes telling someone no is love.
that's right. And with children, that's a great example of
Yeah.
I'm disciplining
Well, it
and
is with
correcting
adults,
you
too.
because I love you and want the
Right.
best for you.
Telling
Yeah.
adults no once in a
Well-
while is love.
Don't touch
Yeah.
that nice little burner right there.
Yeah,
on
that's
the
right.
stove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's out of love and care
Yeah.
and helping them become the best person they can be.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have to give them boundaries.
That's right.
And
Right.
we don't like boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember as a teenager yelling at my mom and dad, I hate you, because they were giving me boundaries. But I'm thankful they did.
Yeah, that's
now.
right.
Yeah.
Now.
I
Yeah,
wasn't at
that's
the
right.
time, but
Yeah.
And really, you give boundaries because there are consequences, right?
Yeah.
So if you go, and I go back to driving drunk, if you drive drunk, you're likely to kill somebody. Maybe yourself, but more likely to kill somebody else. And so there are consequences to living a lifestyle that is outside of love, anger and pride.
yeah.
Pride pushes people away.
And anger is a huge issue in our culture. And it's not healthy in any way, shape, or form.
That's right.
And if we can, point that out to someone lovingly, is that, we need to talk about what you're angry about, because it's not good for you and anybody around you.
Can any of you remember an instance where you were loving your neighbor and it did not end well? I mean, where they didn't listen to you? Or
As a pastor, that's happened numerous times.
yeah. Or do you experience more often they do listen to you? Or is it a mixed bag of tricks? Like any examples come to mind?
I was thinking sometimes it takes time for them to listen.
You need to invest in somebody.
Yeah.
And that often takes time.
That takes time. And again, I'll go back to the kids example.
Yeah.
But kids don't always listen even when you're instructing them or disciplining them. And sometimes they learn the hard way. And the consequence happens. I touched the burner and now I'm crying and my hand hurts. And then you say, well, that's why I told you not to do that. Because, sometimes people have to learn, or they do learn the hard way.
Yeah.
So.
And you still need to hang in there with them when they're learning the hard way.
Yes.
That's, I think, one of the key lessons is love doesn't give up. And sometimes we're in for a rough and long haul with someone, but it's the hanging in with them that sends the largest message, and then they can listen to you.
Yeah.
But it's a long haul.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, as I'm listening, is we're talking about really a set of rules in which we need to live by so that we can get along and love one another. With children, you lay down a set of rules so that they are not harmed, so that they can grow in wisdom and grace and beauty and be able to manage life on their own one day. So you have these guidelines, these rules, and that shows love, and you help them to stay within that. And there will be consequences if they don't. Isn't that what God does for us?
Absolutely.
God lays down a set of rules, guidelines, so that we can grow up to be loving, caring, holy people. And he corrects us when we get off, or sometimes he allows us the consequences of having moved away from the guidelines that he set forth.
Yeah.
And so with that, it's just fascinating because God asks us to love our neighbors as he loves us.
Right.
Yeah.
And he sticks with us, going to what you said, Barry. We have to stick with people on a long road. Isn't that what God does for us?
Yeah.
He doesn't abandon us because we've fallen off track several times,
More than several times.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's a great note to end this podcast on. So thank you, everyone, for listening to us. We come to you from the First United Methodist Church of Gaylord, Michigan. We're located at 215 South Center Street. On Sundays, we have a traditional service at 9 a.m. and a contemporary at 10:45 a.m., and we'd really love to have you join us in person. If you can't come in person, you can still view us via Facebook Live or YouTube. And if you have any questions about us, you can Google us or you can call the office at 989-732-5380. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us.